iDS Talks is a podcast dedicated to helping corporations and law firms find new and effective ways to leverage data, giving them a decisive advantage both in and out of the courtroom.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of iDS Talks. My name is Jonathan Sachs, Chief Revenue Officer at iDS, and I'm joined by Hunter McMahon, iDS's Chief Operating Officer. We're here today to talk about data-driven decision-making in corporate legal departments. Welcome to the podcast, Hunter.
Thank you, sir.
This one's a challenge for me, Hunter. Not the topic, but for our subscribers and our frequent listeners, they'll know that you and I have a bit of a running competition. Who can do more podcasts? I think I'm winning that right now, but this time you're not moderating. You're not you're participating in the podcast. You're the guest. So this does not go into your column as another podcast. It goes into mine. Let's lay that out. We can jump in.
But if I'm the featured guest, does that mean it goes in mine rather than yours if you're just the host?
It's very complicated. I think it's more complicated than we have time for today, but very good point. I'll give you half credit for it. All right.
There we go.
Let's jump into this, Hunter. First question. Many corporate legal departments traditionally haven't been known as data powerhouses. They may have a lot of data, but what they do with it, it's not necessarily what they're in the business of every day, right? They're there to make widgets or do whatever. So why do you see such a significant opportunity for data-driven decision-making in the area of corporate legal departments in particular?
So legal has continued to become a nexus that connects a lot of the different parts of the company. Whether you need a contract for a new sale, or you need a contract for new operations, or you're dealing with litigation about something, legal is often involved. Unfortunately, legal is often seen as a cost center and just don't get in my way from doing business because we're in the business of making widgets, not in the business of litigating or quibbling over details in a contract. But over time, the legal department has really accumulated a lot of information. Now let's separate data and documents really quickly. Okay. So documents themselves, legal has always had a lot of. We love our four-corner documents. We love our contracts, our agreements, those types of things, our drafts, our track changes, all of those elements come into play. And even in that, in litigation, they're gathering a lot of documents from around the company to be able to understand what happened in a case, who agreed to what the email said, what the text messages said, all of these different sources of content. But now what we're seeing in litigation is that much more of the disputes can be centered around data itself. It's not necessarily what was said in the contract. It was, how was it performed? What in the construction management system was done in a certain way versus that, right? It's a sequencing of events. Who worked when? It's not in a document necessarily, but it's coming out through data systems. Now, I've worked on several investigations and litigations that we were able to tell things to the business unit that they had never been able to solve before because we were connecting different departments that didn't naturally connect from a business intelligence way. And legal has that unique position that they cross many departments. And when they're involved, most listen and will take instructions in a way that says, okay, let's connect these dots so that we can understand what's going on, so that we can make a sound legal, sound judgment call, as opposed to in the dark, this is good enough for business, but not necessarily legal. So legal can really become a bridge builder, if you will, across various departments and providing data insights, whether it's as a result of litigation or an investigation, or just, hey, we've got two groups that aren't talking the same language together.
Right. Something you said really resonated with me, Hunter, which is that other data sources are now being called into more and more of the legal actions that are taking place. That what was done may not be found in an Excel spreadsheet, a Word document, or data can actually provide some context before looking at the content of emails and Excel files. So it's not just new data is there. The data also supplements the traditional data sources that I think legal would normally try to tackle. in the
Yeah,
course
so
of
let's look at
investigation?
2 quick examples, right? So when I started back when I was at a law firm and we did a lot of construction defect, I literally had boxes of change orders in multiple offices that I was going through trying to build a timeline. Now, many construction projects are managed through a CMS or a construction management system that manages all of this. You automatically know your timeline from that system if you know how to extract the data itself. You may need those supporting documents that were uploaded, but really a lot of that information is captured in a database as opposed to somebody thumbing through a whole bunch of change orders trying to figure out what was changed, why, and what was the cause.
Sure.
Couple that with another example that most listeners would be able to understand would be your paychecks, right? So if you're in a wage and hour, if you're in any kind of pay dispute or something that does involve somebody's payroll, if you go and say, hey, give me all your pay stubs, when you run that from ADP or UltiPro or one of the various HRISs out there, that's going to generate an output for you. But the data resides in a database. So do you want to go through and review a whole bunch of pay stubs on PDF like doc review? Or do you want to run an analysis in the data format it was stored in? And so a lot more information, we are now able to go back to the data source as opposed to having to go to a secondary or a tertiary output to try to rebuild a timeline.
Well, in fact, we were involved in a case where it was a zero email case, Hunter, right? It was entirely based off of a payroll system.
We've had several of those cases where, there's still an element of documents, policies and things that were in play at the time. But the crutch of the questions of fact, right? What questions are we trying to answer for the litigation were really founded in the databases, not in the emails themselves, not, where we're going through massive doc review. We may have analyzed 30 million or 30 billion or, 300 million records, but we can do those with compute time, not with a whole bunch of eyeballs on screens trying to figure out which way's up on emails.
Sure. Right. And of course, compute time, a lot less costly than attorney review time.
It's more efficient at the very least, right? So we're able to leverage large compute resources that we didn't even have 10 years ago at our fingertips to be able to crunch scenarios and understand data sets to run different models and say, well, if we make this assumption, what's the calculation versus this assumption? And if you're able to understand that for your case, so if legal is able to understand this from an advantage, if you will, arguing over one assumption that doesn't really give you enough of an impact is much more of a business decision, business analysis, but in the legal context. So why fight a fight that's not going to gain you much ground versus fighting the fight over here, spending your time and resources on this argument B when you know that that's actually going to have substantial impact on your resolution.
Right. Good point. All right. So having just discussed all of what we talked about, Hunter, it's pretty clear. I think it's clear to me and you and to our listeners that today's companies are generating a ton of data. It's a scientifically accurate word, ton of data, measurable. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges that companies are facing when turning that data into actionable insights?
Right. So there's a couple of battles, and legal is usually the one that's dealt these cards. Is one, do they even know about it? Access to new technology, the next app, so much more of it, doesn't require an install. It's a quick sign up, and there's free elements that are creating different repositories of data or information that, until legal is inquisitive enough to understand and appreciate the impact that it might have on their case, it kind of goes by the wayside. So really, there could be a gold mine of information that nobody's aware of because somebody decided to sign up for a free app, which is terrifying in and of itself. But then the real hurdle, if you will, for most is going to be layering it together. So how do you get all of these different things to talk together in a way that helps you understand the story that's not a Herculean effort? And so that's a matter of taking a really pragmatic approach and say, what questions are we really trying to answer? Right? what data sources could help us answer those questions? What kind of model do we need to put it in? And then running our analysis. You jump to that analysis too quick, you've got too many holes, and then you may build a strategy over something that with a couple of different tweaks to the analysis falls apart. And so you really want to make sure you understand the questions, the end game in mind, before you start going down the path of analysis. Now, it's iterative. So just because, we run an analysis, we may say, wow, we're not able to understand or appreciate the insights from this with this question. We need to add another data source into it. We need to add another 2 data sources. So oftentimes we get into scenarios and we can identify 10, 15, 20 different data sources. We may start with 5. We may build up to 8 so that we have a level of confidence. And then we may only produce 4, right? Based off of requests and what is actually necessary. And so understanding that, you don't have to go to all 20 right away, but starting with 2 has its own risk proposition in there.
Which is going to be a change for these lawyers to be thinking differently. First of all, they've got to be curious. One of your favorites, right? Be
Love
curious. And the other is that this isn't a traditional approach to other aspects of collecting the data. I've got my list of 20 custodians. I know they have laptops. I know they have computers. I've got to collect all 20 people's right now. What you're saying is that in some cases, it's going to start with the couple, a few, and then build from it, which is, again, different than a traditional approach, which we've been operating on for quite some time.
Yes and no. I think it actually parallels our traditional approach. I think instead of following data sources or data devices, we're following the data itself, right? Back to the source. And so, the old notion of, well, go get their phone. They've got emails on it. We all know the email isn't stored on the device, the mobile device, in the way that we want it to. We go back to the source of the original device. So oftentimes when you're sitting there talking about the 20 custodians, sit there and ask yourself, okay, if we looked at their day-to-day activities, what are they interacting with? And what corporate systems or what systems in general do we need to be aware of? Which ones go away fast, right? They have a short retention schedule. Which ones are around in perpetuity? Which ones are going to take longer to go get?
Right.
Which ones do we have access to and know that we can go get? So we've got clients that we've developed templates for them. If they get certain types of litigation, it's almost like an easy export button. And we already know how to handle it and analyze it because we know their system so well. Versus the new novel system that somebody hasn't gone and extracted data from, that may take an extra minute. But if you need that by next Friday, you got to start with that, not Thursday before like you can on the other sources.
Right.
It's planning.
Right. Little nugget that Hunter snuck in there. For those of you who think your emails sit on your phones, and if you need to get messages, they're all on your phone, not necessarily true. We've got some other podcasts where we've covered this topic, and our colleague Tim Latulip recently did a D3 delightfully digestible data focusing on WhatsApp messages. So go back into our library and listen to some of those. But Hunter, we're not here to talk about forensics and where messages sit. We're talking about data and corporations. So let's get specific, because I'm sure our listeners would appreciate you sharing a real world example, or we've kind of given them one. So we're going to give them another real world example of how iDS has helped a corporate legal department use data analytics to achieve a specific win. And that win doesn't necessarily mean a win in court. It just means that they achieved their goal. Now, don't worry, you can protect the names of both the guilty and the innocent.
So we've done a lot of wage and hour class action analysis over the years, along with some related TCPA, BIPA, and other similar type class actions. I'd say by and large, when we analyze and get called in, there's a problem somewhere. The question is, how big of a problem? And so if we can understand it and help the client understand it, they can then make an informed decision on where to settle or if to settle. So we've had cases, most recently, they were ready to fight, but then the settlement offer came in and it was just too good to take up. And it was a business decision to take it because we had provided the analytics that absolutely disproved the claimant's or the plaintiff's claims that he was discriminated against because he got actually the favorable treatment, not the disfavorable, right? But then we've had some where I remember getting on the phone call with the end client early on in the case, and they were telling us that there was absolutely no problem, absolutely no problem, absolutely no problem. They had training in place to prevent this from ever happening. They were proud of that. They had been through this before, so they really were pretty confident that there was no problem. And I just said, look, in all the cases like this that I've worked on before, there's always a problem.
Right.
So we ran our initial analysis, and there was a problem. Now, it wasn't a 3-year problem, and it was not nationwide. It was, I think, 3 or 4 weeks across 2 different locations where, in the client's defense, the managers did not get the initial training until about a month in due to some recent hiring talent changes that they had. And so when we identified that, counsel was then able to go back. They were able to decertify the class because we were able to show such an isolated group of unique scenarios. And then they were able to settle it for a very favorable number. Now, did they still have to settle it? Yes. But they were able to settle it based off of 3 or 4 weeks in 2 locations, not nationwide for 3 years. So the client, at the end of the day, right or the wrong, paid what they were owed or paid what the plaintiffs were owed, and were able to move on and put in safeguards to make sure that that training mishap never happened again.
Yeah. Interesting. I like that this data and data analytics, the information that's gleaned from data is helping corporations make more educated decisions. Whereas before it was, what's the demand? Are we just going to pay the demand? How bad is this for us? It's making an informed, smarter decision.
So an old client of mine said, everybody forgets litigation is a business problem stuck in the courtroom. And so when you go into it with that mindset, you really have to make an informed decision. Now, sometimes that's a legal strategy, and it really doesn't matter what the data says, because there's a bigger strategy at play that the business has in mind. But I think that's probably the few, not the many. And so in the cases that we get retained in, our goal is to elevate data into insights or information so that the clients can understand what is going on and they can make an informed decision that is supported by data, not stories, not memory, not fairy tales, but actual data and information they can walk into court ready to testify about, that can help them, truly control the narrative.
Yeah. Yeah. So as corporations start to shift to a data-driven approach, that's going to require new skills within the legal team. In your opinion, how can companies bridge this knowledge gap and foster what would now become a data literate legal culture within that organization?
Look, a lot of legal departments have brought in various talents from finance to data analytics. Some of them have been rolled into the legal operations center, kind of more of a business unit within legal. Others have said, we're not big enough to need this, but we have our strategic partners or we know who to trust. And I think that at the end of the day is often where it starts, is who can you trust to lead you down a path, and then know, eventually you might need these skills in-house, just like you need your lawyers and your paralegals and your other support folks in-house to successfully run that legal department. But then outside, what experience do you need? And there are uniqueness to various data sets. So not all data is created equal. Not all data is the same, if you will, insofar as how you need familiarity with it to understand it. And so I think sometimes leveraging a partner that can help you at least get started is often advantageous, because then you don't have that steep learning curve right up front.
Right. I think that's great. Okay. Last question, but it's a 2-parter. So pay attention, listen. Legal tech landscape is constantly evolving. I think we can agree on that. Our listeners would agree as well. So what exciting advancements do you see on the horizon for legal data analytics, and how will they empower legal departments?
Ooh, that's a loaded one. Look, I think I was having the conversation this morning on a walk and talk, and I think that, all things AI is top of mind for everybody. So we can't put our heads in the sand about it. I think the question is how you leverage it or any other technology right now. And I think really refined, very targeted use case scenarios could be very advantageous very quick. I think if we're talking broad spectrum, changes, those kind of things, I think that's going to take much longer. Because of the risks associated with legal making a decision based off of something that they don't understand. But listen, there are enough tools out there, whether it's generative AI or whether it's new searching engines or summarizations, that we're able to put against data sets now that can at least help you get started. So the question is how can these technologies help you get a jump start? Just like we were just talking about, how do you leverage somebody's experience and skills to help you jumpstart an analysis? I think a lot of analytics out there, if viewed through that lens, could help really spur some innovation so that people can understand both their own world better, but then respond faster. How can you make it more accessible? I had the privilege of speaking to the DC Superior Court judges a few weeks ago. And one of the things we talked about is how to make it not just accessible, but usable. And there's a big distinction, right? Websites are accessible by and large now, but many of the websites out there, particularly in the legal system, are not usable by somebody who doesn't know how to navigate it. Sure. So if we used chat AI or chat GPT like interfaces, right, conversational, to make things more accessible, then we may streamline legal operations in a way that we haven't seen before. So do you have somebody that can ask questions to something that is, feeding and learning based off of a legal department's input, that then you're able to answer 50 questions an hour rather than 5, at least at a baseline, to get somebody to the next conversation, go get all these documents and set up a call? I think that there's a lot of workflow automation that can happen even before, any kind of generative AI.
Yeah. Hunter, really, that was very interesting, and appreciate you sharing those insights. I'd like to thank Hunter for joining me today. I'd also like to thank our regular subscribers and those that may be first-time listeners for spending time with us. If you'd like to learn more about iDS or want to subscribe to our iDS Talks podcast, you can visit idsinc.com or wherever you normally go to get your podcasts from. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can also hit the subscribe button. Thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to talking more about data with you in our next edition of iDS Talks.